Hello everyone, welcome to the second session of the third week of the course on Introduction to Modern Applications Development. In the previous session, we had seen how the web version, HTML version of our FareShare application looked like and how did it behave. We saw there were essentially two versions. One was bare, simple, plain HTML, and the other was HTML which was adorned and made beautiful by using cascading style sheets, or CSS as they are called in short. In this session we will look at the changes that we need to do in the program, the command line version of the FareShare program, that gives us first the bare HTML and then HTML with added cascading style sheets. Along the way, we'll introduce some basic HTML and style sheets concepts. We first want to get our programs running, so let us focus first on building the FareShare application, and then let's look at the basic ideas of the web, which include HTML and CSS, but also protocols that are involved in doing web transactions. The session plan for us will therefore be primarily looking at the HTML producing version and the HTML plus CSS producing versions of our program. Let's begin by reviewing the command line version that we did earlier. The command line version is a fairly simple one. There is a static main as usual, and there are two main functions or methods, as Java would say it, the one that just does a setup and the second one that processes command line arguments. And as we know, command line arguments, this particular method is our workhorse. But the process command line arguments is a workhorse in the sense that it dispatches. Depending on what we provide on the command line, it dispatches the corresponding method to handle that. So if we say that FareShare register, then the process command line method places a call to the registration function. If the command line says expenses, then the process command line method dispatches or calls the method that processes expenses, and so on and so forth. In the command line version, the output or whatever was produced by each function was really just simply associated at that point of time within that function itself. So for example, the doSetup function informs us about the database, the particular file that stores the database. Does it exist? If it exists, what is its size? And so on and so forth. This is simply printed out. We would need to change this aspect, the one that prints out information. We are now going to print it out such that instead of producing just plain unadorned text, it actually produces HTML. In order to produce HTML, we need to know the basic structure of an HTML page. Let's have a quick look at a sample HTML page. Here is a sample HTML page. An HTML page consists of two main elements, two main objects. The elements of HTML, which are entities that are like this, which are enclosed in angle brackets. These denote the structural markup of the document. And the other part is, of course, the document itself, or the contents of the document itself. Here, for example, this particular content, the fair share system, is enclosed between two markups, the title and the / title. This markup says that whatever is between the title and / title is to be rendered, displayed, drawn on the output device in a title format. Notice that the title is a part of the head of the HTML page. The contents of the HTML page are enclosed in the body tag, and within the body we have various elements that mark up the structure of the document. For example, we have a header, we have the body text, we have a list of objects, and so on and so forth. This is the output that we need to produce. Note that earlier in the command line version, for example, we just produced this part of the output, the one that is now going to be contents of an HTML page. We only produce the content. Now when we want to produce HTML, we should not only produce the content but also mark it up using HTML markers, for which we need to know the various elements of HTML. Not only should we mark them up with the markers, but also structure the document. We now need to think about what output should be going as title, what output should become a header, what output should be emphasized, what output should not be emphasized, and so on and so forth. None of this was something that we worried about in the pure command line application. There are various ways in which people prefer to structure their documents. Feel free to structure your version in whatever way you feel is nice. The point that we are learning here is producing the HTML output. Let's go back to the HTML version. This is a version of the command line program that produces only bare HTML without any CSS. Notice that it has the usual two functions, the setup and process command line arguments. But now there is something more. You have a bunch of functions, methods, which are called only if we are required to assemble HTML. So if assemble HTML is true, only then our program would execute the methods that assembles the HTML header, does the registration part of the HTML code page, does the expenses part, does the report part, assembles the database information, shows the database, and assembles a tail file, a tail part of HTML. All of these methods, one after the other, collectively produce the entire document. In other words, while this is one single whole document all through the end of the file, the entire file is produced in parts by each of the method. So for example, the header part, assemble header part, produces the header information. The body contains registrations, then expenses if any, and the report if any. Each of these parts of the one single HTML page are produced by different methods in the Java program. We have already looked at the processing that will be done by the command line version, and that processing is going to remain the same. So in this part, let us focus only on the HTML producing functionality of our code. Let us see what the assemble HTML header does. It has a local variable, a string output messages, and it is in this string that we will collect parts of the HTML page. So for example, we print out a comment. An HTML comment begins with a left angle bracket and an exclamation mark followed by 2 dashes and ends with 2 dashes followed by the right angle bracket. The output messages string gradually goes on adding individual HTML elements. So for example, the first it adds the document type declaration, then it adds the HTML opening tag, then the head tag, and here is where it adds the title of this document. Now this title has been chosen by us as a matter of design. How do we want to that particular title to look? The head ends here, the body starts. Notice that the operator used is plus equal to, which means that whatever is there on the right hand side is added to the previously existing contents of this variable. In other words, it just string concatenates. Therefore, as each line is executed by our Java system, the HTML page goes on getting assembled. HTML, head, title, / head, body, and so on and so forth. At some point, we finish constructing the header part of the HTML. Of course, after this, we would be doing the registration part. We would be assembling the registration part of the HTML. Please note that this do registration HTML producing part of the functionality comes after all the calculations regarding fair sharing have been done. We will come to this point again. The structure of producing HTML for registration is also very similar. We use the output messages local variable to go on collecting the contents of the registration section of the HTML page. So it starts with a H2 header roommate registrations, and then if our program is in the registration mode, then it says that it is registering. If it is not in the registration mode, it simply says that the registered roommates are the list of roommates. So the registration part of the HTML page is sensitive to whether our program is executing the register mode or any other mode than register mode. This structure will also be seen in do expenses or do reports. Recall that our web page, the HTML page, always has all the three components. Let's have a look at the web page again. There you go. we find that the web page has a title, the registration section, the expenses section, and the report section, followed by information about the database and the actual database if it exists. If you look at the expenses part, when our program is executing the expenses mode, even then all the three sections exist: the registrations, the expenses section, and the report section. But note that over here the expenses section adds an explicit information about what expense for what event has been added. So what we see here is that the structure of the functions producing HTML is fairly simple and straightforward, but you need to keep on doing it for every function and every part of the web page. So it is not hard to do, it is just tedious to do. Producing the HTML page is tedious but not hard. Let us look at two expenses. Notice again that we are collecting the HTML output into the output messages variable. We are going on concatenating each addition to the HTML page into the same variable. Again, the structure: if our program is actually doing expenses, then print something, add the event information. If it is not doing expenses, that is if it is doing any other mode, registration or report, then it only says there are no expenses recorded. Here is a question: how would you display the output no expenses recorded? Is that a correct way of, is that a very user friendly way of saying that there are no expenses, this is not an expenses mode? For all you know, your page could be talking about a report for some roommate. How else would you rephrase this particular expression? You want to tell your user that right now we are in some other mode but not expenses, and therefore no expenses have been recorded. Think about that. And voila, there we are. That's all there is to produce the expenses HTML part. The do report part is also quite identical in structure but different in content, quite obviously, because it is, the content is about a report. It starts accumulating in the output messages string variable. It is outputting something if the mode is not report, and it is outputting a report if the mode is to report something about a roommate. And once everything is assembled, it just simply prints it out on the standard output. Here is how we collect out the database information. Notice that it is now organized again using HTML tags, as they are called. We are organizing the database information as a table. On the left hand side of the table, we are going to say what is the information that this particular row contains, and in the second column we are actually going to give that particular information. So for example, we are going to say what is the file name of the particular database file, and on the right column we are going to display the name of the file. This is also the information that our command line version used to produce. We are only producing that in HTML form so that it can be displayed on a browser, and we have already seen the web page produced by this program. And we are now at the tail of the HTML page. Recall again that our program first does a setup, then processes command line, and during that executes all the processing required for the FairShare application, and finally assembles a complete HTML page with all the 3 commands every time. The only thing is, if it is doing registration, then the registration part of the page changes. If it is doing expenses, then the expenses part changes, and if it is doing the report part changes. We are having one page with all the information, but for every operation of the FairShare application, it's only a part of the page that changes. One wonders, wouldn't it be nice if we could have HTML that is capable of only changing part of the page? That would be an interesting thing to do. Maybe we'll look at it later in this course. But for now, we are going to write programs that always produce a complete HTML page. This is a good point to take us to a pause and review the material that has been done so far. What we have covered is producing an HTML output without any cascading style sheets. This produces bare HTML, no decorations or any visual elements. They are only markup elements. Let's continue by looking at the FairShare program, but this time let us add support for cascading style sheets. We have already seen the effectiveness of cascading style sheets. The same bare HTML program document actually looks drastically different when its presentation has been controlled by cascading style sheets. How do we produce a cascading style sheets version of our code? All right. Here is the structure of the code that produces a cascading style sheet. For a start, again it starts with main and actually has the same set of functions as the bare HTML program. Do setup, process command lines, and if we are to assemble HTML, then assemble the HTML header, do the registration, do the expenses, do the reporting, assemble the database information, display the database information, and end with assembling the tail of the HTML page. So it looks pretty ordinary. In fact, it is quite same as producing bare HTML, and that's how it is. Because as far as style sheets are concerned, the only thing style sheets do is to specify how individual elements of HTML are to be displayed on the target browser. There are two separate pieces of information: the content, that is the HTML page, and the styling information in the style sheets. If you do not have style sheets, you have bare HTML. It's as simple as that. Let's have a look at how the HTML header is assembled when we want style sheets. Is it different from the bare bones version? Yes, it is. You will see that we now have one more piece of information in the header, that is a link to a file called as a style sheet. What does the style sheet do? We just mentioned. The style sheet specifies how every element of HTML, every tag of HTML is to be displayed on the output device. What are the things that we controlled in display? We could control the font of display, we could control the color of the text of the display, we could control the color of the background, and so on and so forth. A lot many aspects of presentation can be specified through style sheets. In the HTML page, the first thing we do is insert a link to the styling information in a style sheet. So that is why our header has that link tag, which actually contains the particular name of the file which contains the style sheet. This is the name of the file, sample-css.css. The rest of the structure is the same. Additionally, what we have done is, now apart from marking the HTML tags, we would like to mark the logical regions of the document. Recall that we displayed individual user command output in a different way compared to the others. So we would like to mark parts of the HTML page as with respect to their logical content. So we would say that a certain part is a welcome part and mark it up as, using this HTML element, we give it a class called as welcome block, and there is a corresponding closing block. So whatever is between these two div class and /div is going to be treated as a welcome block with a class welcome block. Why do we call it as a class welcome block? Well, CSS allows us to treat a bunch of HTML tags as a class and decide or describe their presentation details. So from a user presentation perspective, we decided to mark a block of HTML as logically relating to welcoming the user to this application. This idea continues again, and we have a registration block with the corresponding end marker /div, /div. Whatever is between the two, whatever is between this div and /div is going to be treated as a registration block, and we will specify all the common properties of the registration block in this part of the CSS. In a short while, we will have a look at the CSS code. Again, as usual, the structure continues. In the string variable output messages, we start collecting out the code for assembling an HTML page. Here we define another class called as expenses block and have a corresponding end marker /div that will come sometime later below. We output the usual expenses HTML as was done in the bare HTML version. and this function ends. A similar functionality, but this time we will name the block as a report block. A similar functionality for the reporting part of the HTML page will be used here. And this idea continues. Let's have a look at the sample CSS code as a final part of the entire story. Here is a sample piece of cascading style sheet which describes the style for the H2 element of HTML. What does the style say? The style says that the color should be whatever this number is. This number is in the format of RR, GG, BB. So red, green, blue in hexadecimal digits. So we do not want any red, any green, but all of blue. This means that headers of level 2 are to be displayed in blue text and the font is bold. Header 3 is all red, no green, no blue, and is bold. Recall that we labeled a certain region of HTML page as a block and we named it as a welcome block. A welcome block part is we say is supposed to have a color of all red, some green, some blue, and its font is 1.5 times what is the standard font chosen by the user. If, however, the welcome block is in the header H1, then it has to be displayed slightly different. In other words, slightly differently. It is to be aligned at the center and has to have this color. In contrast, an H1 tag, that is a header of type 1 without any class, is going to be displayed with the colors 996633. 99 red, 66 green, and 33 blue. Any part of the HTML which is demarcated by a registration block will be having this color. We could add additional specifications. For example, we could say that the font could be bold or font could be italics. The way to specify is very simple. In the HTML page we name, and in the CSS we describe how that name is to be presented. As far as describing is concerned, we take the attribute, color, and the way it is to be described, the value of that description. The attribute say font size and the value. The attribute font type and the value. So a cascading style sheet is actually a very simple way of simply specifying the attribute of presentation and the particular value that it should take for a given presentation type or region of presentation. This illustrates the commenting style in HTML, which is very C-like. A comment in HTML starts with a forward slash and a star and ends with a star and a forward slash. Notice that we have marked each part of the web page by a separate class. In fact, that's because we want to display individual parts of the web page in different styles according to the need. This is how we generate pages which are given the cascading style sheets. Such pages are presented in a much more better form than bare HTML. With that, we come to the end of this session. where we have just been introduced to basic HTML and cascading style sheets, and how we write Java programs that generate HTML and CSS, if necessary, output of our Fairshare application. See you in the next session.